This is going to be an interesting offseason in the NBA with a lot of potential moving parts, one of which is going to be the offseason for the Phoenix Suns, who, after having one of the most successful regular seasons in franchise history, winning 64 games and poised to be on their way to winning the title after having gone to the finals last season, the Suns ended up having an absolute meltdown in the second round of the playoffs against the Dallas Mavericks, blowing a 3-2 series lead and getting obliterated in Game 7 on their own home court. And the biggest thing that stood out from that game, well, there were a lot of things that stood out in that performance, but the fact that DeAndre Ayton, the Suns' starting center and #1 draft pick from 2018, only played 17 minutes in a Game 7 elimination game. And when Coach Monty Williams was asked why Ayton received so little playing time, his response was, "It's internal," whatever that means. But ever since that embarrassing loss and subsequent elimination, and with Ayton getting benched for that game, there has been a ton of speculation of what DeAndre's future entails for his time in Phoenix. Because if you remember last offseason, the Suns had the ability to extend Ayton from his rookie scale contract, which it was reported that Ayton was looking for a max contract extension, as some of his fellow draft peers in Luka Doncic and Trae Young, as well as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, received max extensions. But ultimately, the Suns and Ayton's camp were not able to agree on an extension, which would mean DeAndre Ayton would become a restricted free agent this upcoming offseason, which is now this offseason. And the reason I bring all of this up on the channel is because there is speculation that the Chicago Bulls could be one of those teams in pursuit for DeAndre Ayton should the Suns be looking to move on from him. So in today's video, we're going to be discussing how realistic it would be for the Bulls to sign Ayton, what moves would need to be made to make something like this happen, and would it even be the right move for the Bulls? So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, the talk of the offseason for the Bulls and their fans is what will come of Zach LaVine's free agency. But I've been talking about that a lot on the channel, and there's obviously going to be more to the Bulls offseason than just what happens to Zach LaVine. And a lot of it should be about who are some of the potential free agents that could join the Bulls and improve their roster further. Now, of course, one area that was really talked about all season as an area that needed to be addressed for the Bulls was the Bulls' size and just their general lack of depth in the front court. They tried to put a little band-aid over it by bringing in Tristan Thompson, but that didn't really pan out. And as good as Vucevic is, yes, I still think Vucevic is a really good big man, a good basketball player, but he most certainly had a down year, especially as it related to his shooting, which wasn't timely since the Bulls really could have used his ability to space the floor, especially after Lonzo Ball went down. Now, let me preface this by saying, because I know some will start raging at me in the comments saying that I'm delusional, but I'll start by saying that I don't think DeAndre Ayton to the Bulls is a likely scenario, which I'll explain why in a bit, but I wanted to say that and lay that out at the start. Now, I'm sure most of you know, but for those not aware, DeAndre Ayton was the #1 pick in the 2018 draft. He was a star player at the University of Arizona. He was the #3 overall recruit coming out of high school, a 6'11", 250-pound player who has a really good touch inside the paint, a great rebounder, actually a great offensive rebounder. He was 5th in the league in offensive rebounds, again, an area the Bulls really struggled with this past season. A pretty versatile defender, and also has greatly improved his offensive game ever since entering the league. This past season, he averaged 17.2 points per game on 10.2 rebounds, as well as 63% shooting from the field, and it's a decent free throw shooter. He's not a three-point shooter, although you can tell it's an aspect of his game that if he worked on more, he could get better at. And of course, he's only 23 years old, so he has the youth factor on his side to get even better. And being the former #1 overall pick, there is a lot of upside potential and a long-term asset that could be of great value to the Bulls. DeAndre Ayton has kind of more or less been overlooked in a lot of regards because of the draft class in which he was selected in. It consisted of Luka Doncic, Trae Young, as well as SGA and Michael Porter Jr., who all became standouts in their first couple of seasons, and all were rewarded with max contract extensions this past offseason. So, compared to his draft peers, Ayton hasn't been talked about as much, despite the fact that he was the #1 overall pick in that draft. And he has been a solid player and went to the NBA Finals last season as their starting center. So why, do you ask, did the Suns choose not to extend Ayton for a max extension? And why is there so much talk about his time in Phoenix being numbered, considering the Suns played so well the last 2 seasons and Ayton was a big part of that? And to be honest, It's kind of hard to say. I don't really know. I think it's likely for a few reasons. One being the Suns have historically been a cheap franchise, although they did shell out a max contract to Devin Booker and paid Chris Paul handsomely despite his age. But I think the comments made by Coach Monty Williams both after Game 7 as well as the following day when asked about it further are very telling. That there probably are some larger chemistry issues, locker room issues, ego problems with Ayton that the Suns are not letting on to. That's complete speculation on my end, and I could be completely wrong, but something just seems off with the relationship between Ayton and the Phoenix Suns. Now, some important callouts as it relates to DeAndre Ayton's free agency and factors to remember with a potential contract extension, whether it be with the Suns or another team. Ayton is going to be a restricted free agent, meaning the Suns do have the ability to match any offer sheet he would receive from another team to be able to retain him. And while yes, if some teams offer more than the Suns are willing to match to keep him, Ayton could leave the Suns for nothing. But we all know that isn't going to happen. The Suns are not going to let Ayton walk in free agency without receiving anything in return. He's still a valued young player throughout the league, and they know they can at least get something. They're either going to execute a sign and trade or match any offer he gets in order to keep him. Now, I still think the Suns wanting to keep Ayton isn't out of the realm of possibility, despite what you hear in the media outlets, because it would be hard to break up that core that they have that just went to the finals last season and won 64 games in the regular season. They just flopped in the second round of the playoffs, collapsing in Game 7. Like, it would be a bit reactionary to just say, nah, this team doesn't work. Let's get rid of a piece of our core, which is one of the youngest players on the team and someone we used as a number 1 draft pick, a huge investment on their part. But again, there is still some hesitancy on the Suns and to commit to Ayton, so a sign and trade could certainly be in the cards when free agency hits on July 1st. Now, I see a lot of people saying, well, the Bulls can just simply execute a sign and trade and say trade Vucevic and Coby White for DeAndre Ayton. Vuce gives the Suns an added veteran, a more established player to fit their championship window, and Coby is another guard that gives them some added scoring. But the problem is the money doesn't match up to make a sign and trade like that work. What's interesting about Ayton's contract extension is that he's coming off his rookie scale deal. There's something to be considered called base year compensation, which affects sign and trade transactions. In this instance, 50% of Ayton's salary for that base year would be the amount of salary that would need to be outgoing to the Suns in order to get the transaction complete. So assuming Ayton gets a max extension, which is what he's looking for, his base year's salary of said contract would be around $30.5 million. That means his outgoing salary has to be half of that. So in this instance, $15.2 million. The Suns can take back a maximum of $20.2 million to make a sign and trade like this work, which if you're adding Vucevic into the deal of a sign and trade, it cannot be done, given Vucevic will be making $22 million next season on the final year of his contract. Now, I'm not a salary expert, I've never claimed to be, and why this rule exists in the CBA as it relates to base year compensation, I have no idea why. But that's the rule, and it really limits the Bulls' ability to effectively execute a sign and trade deal for Ayton. While other teams around the league who actually have the salary cap space to sign Ayton to a max deal outright are in a much better position to land Ayton compared to the Bulls. Because again, the Bulls do not have the cap space to sign Ayton outright for a max deal. The only way they would be able to get him is by doing a sign and trade. Now, really the only player currently on the Bulls that isn't set to be a free agent that falls into that range of that $15 to $20 million that would need to be made in outgoing salary to sign and trade for Ayton would be Lonzo Ball. And we all know that that's not going to happen given the Bulls just signed Lonzo last season and the amount of money they invested in him. And I doubt the Suns would do a straight sign and trade for Lonzo when they know they could likely get more from other teams for someone like DeAndre Ayton. You could do something like Coby White and Patrick Williams for Ayton, but now you're talking about giving up a player with a lot of potential in Pete Will to commit a lot of money to Ayton as your future. And you could say, well, the Bulls could throw in a couple draft picks, but the problem is the Bulls don't really have draft picks to send, as their first available first-round draft pick that they have that can be traded is their first-round pick in 2027. So the possibility of the Bulls landing Ayton by way of a sign and trade are very unlikely, because it'll be a massive undertaking to actually get the dollars work, but also for all the parties to agree on negotiating a sign and trade that would entice the Suns enough to want to execute a deal, as well as for the Bulls and their limited cap space by committing that kind of max money to DeAndre Ayton. As I said before, I see a lot of potential in Ayton. I really do think he could be a star in this league and would actually be a great fit on this Bulls roster when you think about all the things that they need. But the guy, is he worth $30 million a year? And that's just the first year. He would be projected to receive a max contract to the tune of 4 years, $131 million. How much could that potentially hamstring the Bulls and their salary cap in the future if they commit to that kind of long-term money to DeAndre Ayton, Lonzo Ball, and Zach Lavine, assuming they re-sign him for the max, as well as even Patrick Williams if they plan to commit to him long-term? Does the lineup of Ayton, Lonzo, Zach Lavine, P. Will for the long-term put the Bulls over the top and set them up for long-term success? I didn't mention Vucevic and DeMar in that because at their age, they're likely not really a part of the Bulls' long-term plan. So that's really what you have to ask yourself is, do you take a big swing on Ayton and hope for that potential to be realized? That number one pick that was seen to be a potential superstar coming out of college, do you see him having that same level of success that we saw in Phoenix when he doesn't have a Hall of Famer and Chris Paul running plays for him and controlling the offense? Does he still play with the same kind of fire after he gets his bag? There are a lot of players who, once they get paid, don't come out with that same level of effort and energy. Is he the ultimate competitor that you want on your team? Those are the things that I ask myself when I see people saying, we must go after Ayton, we must try to make a deal work to bring him to Chicago. Do I like DeAndre Ayton and think he has a lot of untapped potential that hasn't been realized for his age? Absolutely. Do I think he fits the Bulls roster in addressing some of their needs and areas that they've struggled with in this past season? No question. But do I think any of this is likely to happen based on where the Bulls are projected to be salary cap wise, based on the assets they have available to them to make a sign and trade work, and one is actually legal to do as well? No, probably not. But if Arturas was able to pull this off and get Ayton in a steal of a sign and trade where you don't have to give up too much and maybe you even negotiate a lower term deal that doesn't even have you commit max money, I would be all for it. But I just don't see it happening. I would love to hear what you guys think though about Ayton. What do you think his fit would be like for the Bulls, and how realistic would it be to even get him right now? Let me know in the comments. And again, guys, as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.